Well, welcome, AnneMoss. I'm so glad to have you on the show today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and for us to be together again. Your audience is really important to me, so I appreciate that.
Well, and thank you. And I know you were on our part of our summit, and not all of our listeners were able to hear from you there. So many were, but we just felt like this whole message and the work that you're doing is so important, especially when you're raising tweens and teens, to help to raise mental health awareness and what we can do to be able to help our kids. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and no better person to talk to than you about this. And I thought we would start out by you sharing your story and about your son and the mental health advocacy work that you're doing as a result today.
Well, thank you. It was pretty early when I saw signs that my son might be just different or dealing with some issues that I couldn't quite put my arms around. And, I'd see some signs in early elementary or middle school. But it was once he got to high school and he started to use drugs and alcohol that I started to wonder, is he masking something? Is he trying to numb his feelings? And I thought his feelings might be depression. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought it would be thoughts of suicide, but that was his antidote to thoughts of suicide late at night. Charles was the funniest, most popular kid in school. He's 6'1",
Hmm.
135 pounds, and this mop head of loose, curly brown hair. I mean, he's just one of these really charming people. When he walked in the room, everybody turned towards him like he had sunshine in his pocket and he was there to hand it out. And oh gosh, nobody was funnier. He would segue into addiction eventually, but before he actually got there, we did, every program locally. We tried to get a diagnosis. We ended up having to kidnap him out of his bed and take him to a wilderness program. And you don't do that because you caught your kid with a beer and a joint. So he goes to the wilderness program, and they recommended from there therapeutic boarding school. Now, all this was recommended. We didn't suddenly say, oh, what about that wilderness program? We had no idea this kind of stuff, really expensive stuff, existed. And he ends up going to therapeutic boarding school. He's not happy about it. We end up taking him out, putting him in another school. He finally finishes high school. He comes home in 2014. He spent some 22 months outside our home in some kind of placement. It was my hope that he would start to use the tools that he learned while he was away. And the only tools he learned while he was away that he actually used was how to get more drugs, unfortunately, and none of the coping strategies he learned. So he went back to using drugs and alcohol, became addicted to heroin, and for 9 of the 10 months he was addicted and living in my house, I had no idea. I mean, I would see strange behavior, but he did his drugs at night. And
Uh,
here's how he did it. He would text his drug dealer. He would be parked in front of the house. They would deliver it to the car. He would do his drugs in the car. He snorted it. I didn't realize you could snort heroin. Come back in. He would sleep it off. And then when I woke up in the morning, by the time he got up, he wasn't high anymore. So, I rarely saw the symptoms. But these days, your kids can go to like a convenience store and get gummy bears that have a hallucinogen in them. And while they say 21 and over, I've been in lots of these stores and I've never once seen them check any IDs. So they don't have to necessarily go to a drug dealer. they can go to your local gas station or convenience store, and they have access to, you would not believe the myriad of drugs that they can just buy out of a store for like really cheap, like $8. They can get something to get high with. It would be in 2015, he ended up going to detox to rehab. And then he went to recovery house and he relapsed. They took him back to detox. And he left there. You know, he walked out, he got all checked in, he decided he didn't want to be there anymore. And for 2 weeks, we didn't know where he was. We're out to dinner one night. We are beside ourselves. We've had some communication. I had a phone call that day. I was still upset about it, trying to get in touch with him, and he hadn't called me back. And that really worried me. And then the police call, and they meet us in the parking lot, and they deliver the worst news of our lives. And they tell us, my son is dead.
Mm, mm, mm.
My husband said, how did he die? Cheryl, I am so sure it is drug overdose. Yeah, I'm so sure of it. In my mind, I'm like, what a stupid question. And of course, it's not a stupid question, but I was so positive. And they said it was a suicide, not an overdose suicide. And the method he used left absolutely no question. And it was like this extra twist of the knife. And you know what my first question was. How could I be such a crummy mother
Oh.
that my son would check out on me, that he would leave me? Didn't he know we loved him? I would find out more about suicide because I had to understand it.
Mhm.
And it's really not that our kids don't kill themselves because of lack of love. They can have absolutely everything and still struggle with suicidal thoughts. I hear every day. Well, my daughter is at college and she said she's been really depressed, but she's not the type to kill herself. Cheryl, if I could tell you the number of times people have told me and then 2 weeks later called me back and said, oh my God, my child attempted suicide or killed herself or himself or themselves. I do not want that to happen, especially when there are signs and there are ways you can intervene, and you have to work through that fear, because talking about suicide doesn't give them the idea. When we talk about it, we're basically opening up the conversation saying, I'm willing to listen to you.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you for sharing your story. And yeah, I'm just thinking about how that must have felt for you to just go through all of that, and how you did so many things, getting him into the wilderness program, trying, you know, then getting him into the therapeutic boarding school, and every step of the way trying to get him help, and then having it end in suicide.
Oh, it just exploded in our faces. I mean, I thought, after all we've done, or have we added to that, or should we have not done that? Cheryl, I can't tell you to this day if that trajectory was right or wrong, but I can tell you it did add trauma. And I think family-based treatment is the way to go, where if you can get a family to work with the therapist and get the kid involved and, you know, at least one of the parents, I think that has the best success rates of anything. Because what happens when we send them off to go be fixed, we're not getting as much of the benefit of everybody learning what's going on.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're doing a lot of this with eating disorders, and it's had some really good success rates. And I really think it is the way to the future, because we're not, you know, sending them off somewhere. Then there's the transition back, which is dangerous.
Mhm.
And it's a very sensitive time, and you don't know what to do, and you're nervous, like you've had some peace, and now it's the chaos is coming back.
Mhm.
You want to see them, but you're also fearful of where it took you before.
Mhm. You are I have a lot of clients that have gone through this, calling it, I'm sure that you know the term gooned, where they end up coming and taking them, like you said, in the night, and they go to the wilderness program, and that is the hardest part of it, is when they're gonna come home. That reentry, and the parents knowing, now what? Okay, they're coming home, and it being this parallel process. And so I really like what you're saying, is being able to come together as a family and open up those lines of communication with a therapist, that we need help, we need support. And
Right. And I think also letting your child know, I'm struggling. I, I- and so therefore I'm going to reach out for help. So you're modeling help seeking as a sign of strength.
yeah, and when you share, it's like you did everything that you knew to do. And when you look back, what might have you done differently?
Yeah, that's the hard part. Given what was available, I I'm not sure. I mean, we were going to a counselor. That's what he recommended. What I can tell you is that my son was like this jet plane, flying into the side of a mountain. He wasn't going to be alive long had he stayed home. That much I can tell you. So it was an act of parent desperation. What I wish is that when I went to go see the counselor and I asked for a psychological evaluation, which I didn't use those words, I asked for a diagnosis. Oh no, we don't need to give Charles an evaluation, whatever he called it. I should have said, before we take this step, I want a psychological evaluation, but I didn't know those words and I didn't know those steps. But now your listeners know those steps. You're the parent, you're the customer. You need to ask, if I am taking this step, I want evidence that I need to take it. you know?
Mm-hmm.
And now there's this Netflix special. Cheryl, I can't even watch it. I thought, oh, I'll just watch the intro. I mean, I was already activated beyond words. And I'm like, I don't need to feel this bad. You know, I I just didn't have that many options. And had there been some family-based treatment that we could have done over Zoom, that would have been what I did. We did an outpatient thing where we went once a week. He did it's called intense outpatient treatment. And that was actually working. But what happened was my son had a sleep disorder and he was diagnosed with a particular medication. And I came in and I asked the head counselor who's running the groups on Mondays, when the parents were supposed to come and be part of the group too, about the medication that they had prescribed. Would it trigger the urine test? Is it something he could take? So I showed it to her and she looked at me and she goes, parents are so stupid. And then she turned on her heel and she walked out of the room. Cheryl, I was already a mess because my son had broken into a store at the beach because he had mixed his previous sleep medicine with alcohol and broken into a store because he had a psychotic break as a result of mixing the two medications. I was asking for her guidance and advice. And she basically told me I was stupid and I just wanted the floor to swallow me up and chew me up. And I I wrote about it in my book. I'm still really angry about it. And I still see this woman around, and I know she wonders, why doesn't she ever talk to me?
Mhm.
And she has no idea what she does because she doesn't remember it. She called 6 months later, and we couldn't get in the follow-up program after that. They kicked us out.
Mm.
I'd signed up for this thing, and then I'd scheduled the psychiatrist appointment to follow that because they said, well, your kid has to be off drugs and alcohol before we do this part. And then we had all this space. So in that time before we got to the psychiatrist, he starts experimenting with drugs and alcohol when he had been abstaining. In
Mm.
other words, we were making success. And because she decided that, I was no longer worthy of the program because I asked a question, and I would later ask over and over, I kept calling. And then finally somebody said, well, it's because of the benzodiazepines you were allowing your son slam, and he hung up the phone.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like, I didn't even know at the time that's what it was. I mean, I did later. I was just shocked. And I just felt like I had this support, and all of a sudden they were against me. And we were the only two parents who showed up every single Monday for this parent family thing. We had parents like show up occasionally. We were there every single week. We were so dedicated. And I don't
Hurtful.
really, it was, we kept running into stuff like that where the system that's supposed to help you was not helping you. And then the counselor we went to, I kept saying, I wish there was some support group. He would go off to wilderness. Do you know when I found out about family support groups? When I was in wilderness, I watched a webinar and they talked about here are the local family support groups. Look them up on the internet and see when they meet. My son is in wilderness, and for the first time, I found two, and I went to both of them. There's one through NAMI,
Mm.
family support group, and there is one called Families Anonymous if your child is messing with drugs and alcohol. And I went to that, and those were my peeps. I mean, that's who kept me sane.
Mm. Mm.
And when my son died, guess who the first people over to my house knew what to say, just dove right in, gave me a hug, while everybody else is like, what do I say? What do I do? They just knew because they'd been there.
Yeah, you had to have that support community around you. And that's just, I'm sure that you, in so many ways, are helping so many people because just affirming that, because I know that there's listeners here that are going through situations where they just feel like at every turn of trying to get their kids help and they're just all in, like you were all in wanting to know, how do I help my son? I need guidance and direction. And you didn't know. And here, the very place that you're going and you're showing up so faithfully is turning their back. And you're stupid, you know, and the amount of shame you feel and blame is so, it just is so pervasive anyway. And so to have them just cut you off like that when you weren't doing it on purpose, you didn't know. So
No,
often you don't know.
it was the oddest, you know, I don't think she adored me. And
Mhm.
I would find out later, I would talk to another mom. She says, oh, we did that program. She doesn't like moms like us. And I'm like, what do you mean? She said, well, she likes the single moms who are struggling, but those of us who have like more normal families or more, middle class or upper middle class. So she has a little prejudice against us. She said, I've felt the same thing. She said, don't take it personally. It's kind of like you're shunned to begin with. And I thought, wow, that's really
Mhm.
strange. So if I were to give your your listening audience, and your child is struggling with drugs and alcohol, because they are 15 times more likely to die by suicide. So you really want to start to change your family dynamic in a way that creates an environment where they're more likely to make a change. So you want to look for programs that support craft, CRAFT. They're books, and I will also give you for your show notes. It is a parent guide for books and support groups and podcasts that focus on the substance use and mental health and suicide prevention, kind of all into one. So I have a guide, and I'll send you a link to that, because it just gets like, well, is this mental health? Is this because of marijuana use? Is this robo tripping? Is it heroin? Because they're abusing poly substances. And now they can go get all this stuff at convenience stores. Well, you can't test that with a urine test. So lots of times if they're doing these programs, they'll go get these sort of under the radar drugs and like, I'm clean. And they're really doing all these under the radar drugs that they can't test for.
Yeah, yeah. So craft. They want to look for programs. I've heard of craft and get support. And then, there's listeners here and they're like, I'm not sure what's going on with my kid. They're in their room, they're smoking pot, they seem depressed, they don't want to go see a therapist. What do I look for? What do I do? What would you say to that?
Well, I can tell you that any child sitting in his room smoking dope is masking something.
Yep.
And I think the biggest thing is listen more and lecture less. And I say that because we really need to move more from this sort of punitive parenting to more of a wisdom guide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Understand that you can support this, you can help, but you can't fix all this. You can't. It's not possible for you to do that. You're fixers, you want to fix it. But you can change the way that you communicate, and you can change the way that you listen. Listen more and lecture less. And what I mean by that is lecturing's never worked, right?
No.
And when we say, I'm really concerned and I think I've been talking too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you some questions, then I'm just going to shut up and I'm going to listen to you because something's going on and I don't know what it is. So I think one good way is say, I'm really struggling. I don't know what to go with something. And would you take a walk with me? And have the conversation that way. What you're really going to have to work on is allowing for those long stretches of silence.
Yeah.
And not start to backfill it constantly with words and advice and all that sort of stuff. You need to sit back, because if there is silence and they are not answering you, what is happening is they are processing.
Yes. Yes.
And we need to be patient because that's where the nuggets are. And sometimes you'll make a mistake and you'll dive in and you'll go, I promised I would shut up. I tell you what, in this conversation, when I interrupt again, if you would say, Mom, you told me you would allow me to talk and you would listen, just remind me that that's what the deal was. And I'm going to shut up again. Because remember, I'm trying to learn here too. You're giving them some power back when you're doing that. You're giving them some agency. So as parents, you always want to look for opportunities to give them some agency, to give them their power back. let's say you're doing a presentation at work. You come in the room and you're like, I'm like so freaking out about this presentation. Can you come take a walk? I just need to chill out about it and I need to exercise. I need somebody to be with me. If you wouldn't mind just being with me. And then discuss it. Well, I've been thinking about this. What do you think about that? And you know what would help if you just gave me a random hug every once in a while, or just a stupid text, or whatever you're comfortable doing. It would just kind of make me feel that sense of relaxation. Now, let's say they come up and they hug you, give you a random hug. All of a sudden, what do? You turn into jelly. Because how often do your teens and twins do that, right? Turn into jelly. They're going to feel that power. Giving them their power back. You're giving them purpose. Like, wow, what I do means something.
I really appreciate you saying that because it's also modeling it for them that I struggle too with these things and opening up that communication with sharing, not for them to take care of you, but just to say, hey, I'm noticing I'm feeling anxious about this. I would love for you to go for a walk. And then they get to feel that sense of, yeah, my mom struggles too. And you're creating a climate in your home where it's safe to have struggles, to talk about how you're feeling.
So what you're doing is you're being vulnerable, but you're not
Mhm.
oversharing. You're not going out and going, take a walk, go, well, your dad lost his job and we're going to lose the house and we don't have anything in the bank account. Too much.
Mhm.
Oversharing. You know, if you're in that situation, what you'd say instead is, all right, we got to regroup, and your job is to figure out how we can cut back at the grocery store. Here's our list. You know, what can we do to make changes to save $100? You know, or whatever the kid likes to do, you know, give them that one little piece of it. But again, we want to be vulnerable without oversharing. Maybe there was abuse in your background and you just, you know, just a little tidbit. You don't want to overwhelm them with the whole, you know, the brother sexually abused me and it happened every night and I have these visions. You know, you want to be careful getting into all that because it can start to activate you if you've had that kind of trauma in your life.
Yeah.
But you can also say, you know, I had a lot of trauma growing up
Mhm.
and I'm still working through that with therapists. And it's been very helpful. And you can work out what little pieces of that you might want to share without scaring them to death.
You keep going back to this theme of getting support. And I find, and I found in my own life that it's so important for me to get support so I don't dump on my kid. Because that's when it happens. If we're not getting support, if we don't have a safe place to go and talk about these things or work on these things, then it ends up leaking out on our kids. And the same thing about the fear. As you were talking about being a listening presence, what I talk to my mom so much about is how it's scary. Like if your kid's abusing alcohol and drugs or they're depressed, you're terrified. I mean, it's
Terrified.
really scary. And then what do we want to do when we're afraid? We want to control things. But that doesn't
And
work. And that's the advice giving, that's wanting to lecture rather than listen. And so it can be so helpful. Like, where do I go? That's why we started the Moms of Tweens and Teens community. It's like, where do I go to dump out my stuff so that I can listen? Because I'm so scared right now. I'm really having trouble listening. I want to just fix this because it's so hard and difficult.
I think what you offer is so beautiful. And I see the amount of activity that people ask their questions and they get, this is what I tried. They don't necessarily, it's not like people are giving advice. They're just saying, I don't know what your situation is, but this worked for us, and we have this situation. So it allows people to see the different ways what worked for that child, and to take little pieces of that and try one little thing. But that support and having a place to bounce things off of and being with other people who are in that moment with you. I mean, this is, a lot of people will hit that tweens and teens. And I remember hitting it going, I'm loving this. Everybody's talking about how hard it is. And then a year later, I was like, oh my gosh, now I see. And what do I do? And I'm overwhelmed and I had nowhere to go. That support group was everything to me.
Yeah.
I mean, even now I run a grief support group for grieving parents. Just having a place where you can talk about the things that really bother you that no one else understands unless they're going through it is so important. I mean, it just opens up your way of thinking. It allows you to step outside yourself. So when you want to kind of launch into that, take a pause and a deep breath. Do I really need to fill it with noise right now? And the way I got my kids, the way I stopped lecturing, I asked my kids to help. I said, every time I lecture, you need to say, Mom, that is unsolicited advice.
Yes.
So it takes 18 months to break a habit. This habit was broken in 8 weeks because they loved it. Another way to give them their power back. They were able to say, Mom,
I know.
really?
I love that. And I've done that with my kids too. And my kids are older now. They even call me out and they're like, you're giving me unsolicited advice. And I'm like, oh, there it is,
And
but
then I laugh,
yeah,
I'm like, oh my
yeah.
God, you're right.
Yeah, yeah. And but they can tell you, and I'm not asking. And then it's amazing how powerful it is when I say, you know what? I believe you're going to be able to figure this out. Even then,
Perfect.
and then they go, thank you, Mom, because we don't realize that we're also sending the message that we don't believe that they can handle it.
And that is the next step, is allowing them, I'm confident you'll figure this out. I mean, that's it. And it's really that easy. So you've given them the confidence that I know you'll figure it out. You're really smart. Now, I think that what's important to get them to that place sometimes, we want to use curiosity over criticism. Start asking questions. My son's was moving out to California. Mom, we're going to move all of our belongings out there. And I mean, they were worth what, maybe $900, all their stuff. And I said, I want to dive in and go, that's going to be too expensive. You're going to have to do this and blah, blah, blah. So I didn't do that. I just took a deep breath and I said, oh, okay. I said, how much is that? And he goes, I don't know. And I was like, oh, okay. I was just curious if you knew. And you said you were couch surfing once you got there. Where would you put all that stuff? And then it was like, never mind. You'll figure all that out. I don't need to ask these stupid questions. 2 weeks later, he calls me back. Mom, it is like $6,000 or more to move all this stuff all the way to California. And we looked into a trailer and then nobody had a hitch and blah, blah, blah. And then once I got there, it's $200 a month near LA to store your stuff. And he goes, I don't have that kind of money. And I said, so what are you going to do? I'm so curious. And he goes, well, we're just going to sell it all on Craigslist and stuff like that and take the money and put it towards, our trip. And I said, oh my gosh, that's such a great idea. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say, oh, my questions prompted that. No way. I planted seeds.
Yeah, it's a whole different outcome too when we do that. I love that criticism. I mean, curiosity over criticism, or
Right.
curiosity over that advice giving.
Yeah. And asking those questions. It's called, the fancy term, you can actually take something called motivational interviewing.
I love that. Hmm.
And you can actually earn a certification for that. And, I've taken it, but I was already doing that. And because when they come up with the idea, how much more invested in it are they than if you tell it to them? Anytime, I remember one time telling my son, you shouldn't have parties at when you're in college because underage people are going to come and they're going to arrest you. And he goes, oh, Mom, that's BS. So guess what? 2 weeks later, he has a party, underage people are arrested, and he gets arrested, and his friends, everybody at the party. He doesn't even remember that I ever said it. And at that point, I just said, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now what?
Right. I said, you've had, each one of you got one lawyer for your first infraction, and you both used it up. What are you going to do? And guess what? Those friends got together and they figured it out.
And they figured it out.
They all went in together. There were 5 of them. So 5 of them all pitched in money by selling stuff that they had to invest in a lawyer to, get through and do community service and the whole 9 yards. So he didn't do jail time or anything, but he figured it out. And I held my breath. Should I intervene? Should I bought a lawyer?
Yeah, those natural consequences, and that, that's how they so often can learn. So going back to the suicide piece, tell our listeners the work that you're doing, where they can find you, how they can get support from you, about your organization that you're leading. What are you
So,
up to right now?
so one of the programs that I do is called Raising Mentally Healthy Kids, Parenting Tips for Teaching Kids How to Cope. And most often I am asked by a school district to do this, in their community, because what they often do is they'll pay for somebody to come train the teachers, the counselors, but we need to have the students in that equation. And we also need to have the parents. And what's left off most often is the parents. There is very little support for parents after a child has admitted they're suicidal or attempted suicide. So I do, and I'll send you the link. I have a bunch of ebooks on what to say next, what to do next, and that kind of thing. But we also have, and hopefully by the time this podcast, it'll be out or close to be out. It is a documentary saying parents to parents after your child's suicide attempt. And we
Wow.
talk about, what you do, because I mean, how do you feel after that? Freaking out, right? I mean, how do you
Totally.
keep from like every time they walk in the door, how are you? So it's just various strategies that go with that. And I've also included those in the ebooks as well. Mental health awareness education. I've written 2 books, and I do a lot of, we'll do a lot of webinars, but I speak all over the country, and 35% of what I do is in businesses. And when I'm in businesses, I'm also addressing parents. And then the rest of the time, I'm at colleges, universities, and school districts.
So parents can also reach out to you and have you come talk to their school.
Right. Went out to Lafayette in California and I spoke to those parents, and we had 300 people in attendance. And
This-
I, talked about what are the signs of suicide? What do you say or do? And then I end on those parenting tips for teaching kids how to cope. And then they get, printout of one page that has all those in there that kind of gives you those examples. It's a process. So you want to understand that if you do one or two sort of okay, that's progress. Pat yourself on the back. Don't beat yourself up. Takes a while.
Yeah, it is a process. And I like that because when you're scared to death, you want to do it all at once. And we can put so much pressure, but just learning some of these things like the listening that you modeled and what you can say and what can you do. Can you think of one other coping skill that parents can help their kids with?
I think that understanding their fears.
Mm,
So let's say you've got a psychiatrist appointment and it took you 8 months to get that psychiatrist appointment, and it is tomorrow, and your kid is saying, I'm not going. And you want to go and demand it because it took
yeah.
everything. You had all that paperwork. You want to leave that behind for a minute and you want to figure out what's behind that fear. So you want to say, well, why don't you share with me why you don't want to go? And I'm just going to shut up and listen to you. If I interrupt, you need to remind me, hey, mom, you were listening, remember? And then you listen, because you can't do anything about if you don't know what it is. I don't want to go to the psychiatrist, mom. This is them talking, because they'll prescribe medication and it'll make me a zombie. Well, as a parent, I would say, well, wow, I wouldn't want that. I love your personality. I wouldn't want that either. Can you start writing some of these questions down and can you ask the psychiatrist? In fact, I would love to get together and write down any other questions. And I think also we have to have a pact that I'm not going to make you do something, because if you're not invested in it, it's not going to work anyway, right? So why don't we just make that pact going in that nobody can make you do anything? Um,
Ah,
So are you willing to go now? Can you just go to this appointment so we can ask this quick? Because I'd like to know the answers from a professional about some of the things you've put forth.
that is so much more empowering because they say, I don't want to go, and you tend to freak out versus, oh, tell me why, what is it about going to that appointment that makes you not want to go? And just getting them to talk and I'll shut up, like being able to tell them that ahead of time. I loved when you said, oh, wow, I wouldn't want that either. Yeah, that validating of how they're feeling and who really wants to go. I don't like the first time I went to therapy, I didn't want to go to therapy. I didn't, it's so normal for them to resist going. They feel like somebody's going to look at them under a microscope or something's wrong with them. So just validating that fear. And I don't want that either. And why don't we can write down some of those questions, and then I can't make you. You're giving them the power back.
Right. Exactly.
I
And
can't
like I
make.
said, anytime you can give them their power back and you're not being judgmental. Never, I mean, they may give you like a really crazy reason that you don't understand, but try to look at it from their perspective and understand where they're coming from. And, oh, wow, I wouldn't want that either.
Mhm.
If you can step outside of your mom duties and all the forms you had to fill out,
Mhm.
trouble you had to go to make the appointment. You just got to leave that outside the door for a few minutes and step into their shoes, which isn't always easy.
Yeah.
but it
Yeah,
has a better results. And if you're
mhm,
results
it
oriented,
does.
if you're
It
results oriented, that's what can push you towards trying this, is because you get better results.
And you do, and it's hard to believe that, but having been somebody and and you do this as well, it's amazing. Just even handing it back to them and saying, I can't make you, empowers them. And then they go, oh, she can't force me. This is going to be my decision. How often then they do choose to go because it's their decision and they do want to feel better. They
They
do.
do. They
Um,
want to feel better. They want strategies. They just don't want to be sent off. They don't want to have like tons of side effects. They don't want the stigma of having, there's just a lot of stuff they fear. And we need to find out what that is.
mhm. AnneMoss, this has been so helpful, and I want everybody to check out. I'm so happy you're giving those books, and I will put those in the notes, your website, what you're doing. I hope people will reach out to you and even have you come speak to the school. I mean, it's an epidemic now with our kids
It
and their
is.
mental health, and um, so many moms are struggling with this with their kids. And so tell them where to find you.
Mental health awareness education. And if you look up emotionally naked speaker, you'll usually find me. And suicide prevention speaker, AnneMoss Rogers. Usually I come up for those, but I definitely am an advocate for parents, and you guys are my peeps. So
Mhm. Yeah. I am so grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm so grateful for you using your story and um, your grief and your tragedy for good to help us and to save lives. And so I just want to thank you. And I know I'll have you back again.
I
And
love that.
yeah, and I just really want you to know how much I appreciate you. There he is. For all
There
of
it
us
is.
that can see, oh, look at that hair and that beautiful face. And yeah, his life mattered.
Yes,
He's making a difference too.
he still is.
Yeah.
And that's what we grieving parents don't want our children forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Cheryl.